My fingers found the cool iron of the railing before I realized I was holding on. It was smooth where generations had worn it, and the little silver bird brooch at my lapel caught slats of colored light from the stained glass and flashed like a heartbeat. He waved me away with that small, precise motion of his hand. Jason, the new choir director. His jaw set like he was erasing a problem. "Not today, Mrs. Bennet," he said, and the words fell into the loft like a dropped note. Below us, the choir arranged themselves beneath the congregation of brass pipes. The pipes my check had bought. $300,000 in polished metal and carved wood. And I could feel every penny in the hollowness that opened behind my sternum. The organ filled the room with that first wide chord, and the hymn began without me. I stood there with my mouth barely moving, as if the breath itself had been stolen. My hands trembled on the rail, and I thought of Richard. We moved to Springfield in 1981. I still wake on Sundays and half expect his coat on the peg by the door, his slippers warming by the hearth. He used to joke that my hair in that low bun made me look like a queen. I smile when I pin the bun now, even though he's gone 6 years. It's a small ceremony, hair, brooch, dress, and it steadies me. The smell of coffee always does too. That bitter steam that seems to announce the day. Today the coffee went cold in the pot while I smoothed my skirt. I had sung in First Episcopal since we walked through those doors with young hands and hopeful hymns. My voice was never the one people wrote about in papers, but it fit. It found its place between alto and comfort, a voice that held the line. Singing was as steady as the pews, as steady as faith. So when Pastor Willis spoke about the old organ's tired lungs and led a campaign to replace it, something inside me answered. Richard had left us careful papers and insurance that could mean a proper future to my years. I had lived simply. No travel, no expensive dresses, just quiet dinners and quilts for the grandkids. The money sat there like a promise. I asked to speak with Pastor Willis in his office. His Bible lay open on the desk. The leather was worn where his thumb always lingered. He looked at me with that soft gravity. "Pastor, friend, man who had baptized my eldest. I want to donate for the organ," I said, and my voice was smaller than I felt. I remember the sudden light in his eyes, the way he put his hand over mine and said, "Thank you. Thank you." I insisted on anonymity. It felt right, an offering between me and God, the kind of secret we keep so it can be only grace. For weeks I was part of the decisions. I sat in damp basements with the organ builders, smelled the oil on their hands, heard the hollow thrum when they tested a pipe. I learned about voicers and stops and ranks in the way an old friend learns the rules of a new game. By listening. Pastor Willis included me, and I believed I belonged to this shaping. Then Jason arrived from Boston with a modern haircut, and an idea of perfection that didn't include hands that shook. He watched us in rehearsal like a critic reading a script, lips thin when things weren't precise. He introduced things that twitched my ears, complex harmonies, syncopation, a new drive to elevate the sound. He smiled at me sometimes with the careful charm of a man checking a room for flaws. After rehearsal one Tuesday he asked me to stay. The light in the sanctuary was watery through the windows. Dust motes moved like soft confetti. He sat across from me, his fingers folded around a slim cup of coffee and said, "Mrs. Bennet, you're struggling with the new arrangements." He said it like stating a fact. I felt my breath go shallower. "I can practice," I began. "We need a different texture," he said, eyes flicking to the pipework as if the organ itself would agree. "We're aiming for a contemporary sound. Maybe you could help in other ways." He placed a hand on my shoulder, the touch quick, efficient. It was kindness shaped into dismissal. I left the church with the old wood smell clinging to my coat. My steps echoed in the vestibule. At home I took the little wooden box Richard used to keep his coins, and thumbed the edges of the canceled checks. I do not know why generosity felt both like healing and like a bet I had placed with fate. I had wanted to give something that would sing for years after I was gone. I didn't imagine the pipes would one day sing past me. On the Sunday of the dedication I came early. The sunlight through the east windows poured in like syrup. The pipes shone like a little city. I tucked my brooch in place, bird facing forward, and climbed the winding stair to the loft, my choir robe brushing the banister. Jason looked up with a crisp, rehearsed smile. For a second I thought perhaps Pastor Willis had spoken to him. He moved his hands arranging folders, then said, "We decided to feature stronger voices for today. It will carry better." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Not today," he said again, as if reading from a program. He gestured me away, gentle as a shepherd moving a lamb. I felt small. My fingers closed harder on the rail. The metal was cool, a contrast to the sudden rubbing heat of embarrassment on my cheeks. The first notes spilled out, my organ, everyone said as they wiped their eyes, and then the hymn rolled, full and without me. I stepped down into the back pew like someone trying to make herself small. The wood smelled of lemon polish and decades. I folded my hands and let the sound fill the space where I had expected to stand. Tears blurred the stained glass into watercolor. The bird brooch at my heart felt heavier than when I pinned it on. When the congregation rose to admire the pipes, I slipped into Pastor Willis's office and left an envelope on his desk, a copy of the donation agreement and a note that read simply, "Music belongs to all." My hand trembled when I wrote it. I walked out into the bright morning and the hymn still hung in the air, a ribbon of sound that tied me to the place and, for the moment, left me knotted at the end. Later the phone would ring. There would be a meeting. Changes would come. But for that hour, I sat in the back pew and listened to the organ breathe, and I felt the pipes vibrate under my feet like a promise, and like a question. The final chord held and I let it, letting the vibration move through the bird on my lapel, through the rail under my hands, until at last my shoulders loosened and I breathed. My fingers found the cool iron of the railing before I realized I was holding on. It was smooth where generations had worn it, and the little silver bird brooch at my lapel caught slats of colored light from the stained glass and flashed like a heartbeat. He waved me away with that small, precise motion of his hand. Jason, the new choir director. His jaw set like he was erasing a problem. "Not today, Mrs. Bennett," he said, and the words fell into the loft like a dropped note. "My loves, thank you so much for taking a few minutes to listen to me. Truly it means the world. This channel is still in its first steps, and every new subscriber is like a breath of life that helps us reach our small goal of 1,000. If this story touches you, please tap subscribe and tell me in the comments which city you're watching from. It helps me feel connected to you. A few days before the dedication, the house felt like a stage waiting for its cue. I woke before dawn as I always do to the familiar ritual. The kettle hissing, the soft clink of spoon against ceramic as I stirred my coffee. The first sip is always bitter and steadying, the scent rising like a small benediction through the kitchen window. The light came in thin and gray that morning, slipping under the curtains and painting the linoleum in stripes. It warmed my hands around the mug and reminded me of simpler Sundays. Richard's shoulders filling the doorway, his newspaper folded down to the comics. He's been gone 6 years, but habit is a loyal friend. I still smooth my skirt, twist my gray hair into that low bun, pin the little silver bird to my lapel, and for a moment he's there. I'm 68. I've sung in First Episcopal since 1981. My voice never stood out in a crowd, just enough to hold a harmony, enough to keep the part steady when others drifted. People took comfort in that steadiness. So did I. The choir was my second home. The pews and the hymnals and the warm lemon-scented polish of the wood were as familiar as my own hands. There was a bench 2 rows back on the left where Richard used to sit. It's still empty on Sundays when our children visit. A quiet absence that always tugs at the edges of the service. That empty seat has become a kind of altar to memory. When Pastor Willis mentioned replacing the organ, something in me hummed. The old instrument wheezed like an aging breath. The pipes had lost a little of their pride. After that, I found myself swept into the work in a quiet way. I tasted the wood polish on my fingers from the organ builder's shop. I learned the language of stops and ranks, of voicers who coaxed sound from pipes the way gardeners coaxed roses from cold soil. The pastors and builders included me in the meetings at first. I liked feeling useful. It kept the ache from being only a hollow. Then Jason arrived. He's 34, from Boston, with the posture and polish of someone used to big stages. He carried a leather folder, a silver baton tucked like a secret. He speaks in clipped sentences and wears his impatience in the way he taps his ear when a measure goes wrong. At rehearsals he stood behind the choir like a director in a theater, eyeing each voice as if auditioning. There was a difference in his look when he studied me, an appraising tilt, as if deciding whether I fit the picture he had in his head. There were small things before the first sharp moment. He started introducing complex arrangements, pieces that leaned toward the contemporary. He asked us to push, to shape phrases in ways that made my throat ache to follow. I told myself I would practice. I told myself I could adapt. After one rehearsal, the sanctuary emptied into soft sunlight and dust motes hung like confetti. He asked me to stay, and sitting across from him, I felt the warmth of the church drain away. He told me gently that the choir needed a different texture. He suggested other ways I might serve. His hand on my shoulder was brisk, meant to comfort, but it felt like a direction rather than a touch. On the doorstep that evening, the church bell struck 6. Its sound rolled across the town like a hand closing. I had always thought the bells sang to me in the morning, calling us in, reminding us of the day's work. That night they felt like a farewell. Still I held to hope. The loft was where I belonged. I pictured the new pipes gleaming behind me, sunlight catching on brass, the sound rising and wrapping around the congregation like a familiar blanket. On the altar there was a single brass candlestick we leave lit on harvest Sundays, its flame steady beneath a burgundy curtain that falls like a velvet promise. That burgundy, the color of old robes of quiet dignity, felt suddenly like a veil. I noticed the worn edges of the hymnals on the altar, the gold leaf rubbed thin where hands have turned the pages for decades. Those little things are anchors. They remind you what you're singing for. The morning before the dedication I walked the sanctuary alone. I ran my fingers across the pew where Richard had sat. The wood was smooth from years of hands, cool under my palm. The loft stairs smelled faintly of pipe oil and lemon polish. I climbed, my robe whispering against the banister. The pipes were there at last, reflecting the morning light like a small city of brass. My chest filled with a complex kind of gratitude, pride, relief, and a deep trembling hope that this would be my last great song. I pinned the bird brooch near my heart and told myself it was just another Sunday. But in my mouth the words tasted like a prayer. I could feel the shape of what was to come, the way a chord resolves before the final note is struck. My fingers went instinctively to the railing, the iron cool and familiar under my palm. I hadn't even realized I was gripping until the knuckles whitened. Jason's hand flicked in that small, precise way, no louder than a conductor's cut, and the loft felt suddenly much smaller. "Not today, Mrs. Bennet," he said. Not angry, not cruel, just final. The kind of sentence that closes a door with gentle politeness. I looked for Pastor Willis like a child looks for a parent in a crowd. He was standing at the foot of the chancel, palms folded over his Bible, the soft light catching the silver at his temple. His eyes found me for a second and I thought I saw something, an apology? A hesitation? And then his face smoothed into that pastoral calm I have trusted for years. He gave me a small nod, almost imperceptible, the way someone might acknowledge a difficult truth. It was not the look I needed. Cold rose up from my stomach. My throat tightened as if someone had tied a ribbon there. The wood beneath my feet seemed thin and hollow. For a second I couldn't catch my breath. The scent of lemon polish and pipe oil rose around me, ordinary and awful, as if the sanctuary itself were conspiring to keep me in the right-sized place. $300,000 gleamed in brass below me, and I felt the weight of it like an accusation. My hands trembled so badly I could feel the pulse in each finger. I pressed my fingertips into the iron rail until the pattern of cold and carved ridges burned my skin. A memory came unbidden. Richard's laugh as he tightened my bun the way he always did. The small ceremony of getting ready for church. He used to clear his throat before the organ played, like it was a housewarming notice for his spirit. I thought he would be furious. He always defended me. But he was not there to stand between me and a younger man's taste. Jason tipped his chin toward the choir. Voices settled into their places like birds finding branches. The organ took a breath. The first chord filled the loft and rolled out over the congregation. It sounded magnificent. It sounded like everything I had wanted it to be. It also sounded without me. There is a particular kind of shame that wraps around you slowly, like the chill after a window has been opened. My face flushed hot and then felt numb. I could have moved. I could have left my robe and walked down those steps and asked aloud why. I imagined the faces in the pews turning. Some surprised, some sympathetic, some uninterested. Pastor Willis could have met my eyes and said something, anything, an interlude, a small act to steady me. He did not. Instead, he looked down at his Bible and touched the worn leather as if grounding himself to Scripture. I watched his fingers tremble almost imperceptibly. For a moment the sanctuary filled with hymnals and light and the friction of pages turning. And in the margin of a pew I felt the old, quiet betrayal of being overlooked by people I had loved and trusted. It was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was a narrowing, a slow exclusion. My breathing came in short staccato drafts. I tried to pray the little prayers that used to come like automatic notes. Help me stay calm. Help me be wise. But prayer felt slippery today. My words slid off the inner walls like oil. My hands were slick with sweat. The bird brooch at my lapel pressed into my chest like a compass, always pointing me back to who I was. I thought of dignity. I thought of all those Sundays, 42 years, when I had stood and breathed with the congregation, when my voice had been one thread in a larger tapestry. Was the tapestry suddenly less beautiful without my thread? Or was someone claiming they could weave a better one, who had never felt the weight of that old fabric? There was an option that rose in my mind like a flame. Go down there now and speak. Call attention to the dismissal. Demand explanation. Make it public. Let there be an argument, let there be embarrassment for those who had the power to push me aside. I could see Jason's clipped expression. I could see Pastor Willis's hands tighten on the Bible. I could imagine my daughters' faces if they heard it recounted at the table later. Proud, horrified, frowning in that particular way that said perhaps it was time to draw a line. But the more I pictured it, the less it felt like what I wanted. I had never been a person to tear at the seams in full view. My husband taught me to settle a hurt with dignity, to do the thing that made room for the future and didn't burn the house down. I closed my eyes and let the sound of the organ carry through me. I let it be both grief and gift. So I stepped down quietly when the hymn finished, robe whispering against the banister, and walked to the back pew. I sat where would creak the way it always had beneath me and folded my hands until the tremor calmed into something steadier. The congregation milled around the chancel, and I let them admire the pipes for a while. I breathed the air that smelled of lemon and polish and old prayers and wrote in my head the first line of what I would do next. After the service, I didn't storm into meetings or demand explanations. I walked instead to Pastor Willis's office, the hallway lights slanting through the high windows, and felt the smallness and largeness of the decision I was about to make. I laid an envelope on his desk. Inside was nothing dramatic, no confrontation, no hand-lettered manifesto, just a copy of the donation agreement and a single short note I had written with shaking hands. Music belongs to all. It was not retribution. It was not surrender. It was the sort of quiet claim I could live with. It was my way of reminding the people I trusted, and myself, that generosity should not come with You accepted my gift in confidence, I said, and let the sentence hang. The kettle boiled in the background and made the line carry for a breath. I didn't give it to buy a place on a program. I gave it because this church is my home. I know. He swallowed. I know, Eleanor. You know I've always. There was a small rustle. I could imagine him tapping the Bible on his knee, the leather soft where his thumb rests. I don't want to disappoint you. His apology sounded genuine, but there was something pressed against it. An anxiety that tasted like lemon polish and old paper. He was trying to balance 1,000 slender things. Gratitude, donors, the choir's new direction. It was the way he talked now, measured, careful, like someone walking a tightrope in a stiff suit. Robert, I said softer. I don't want to make waves. But I won't be eased out with a smile. 42 years isn't a soundproof thing you can mute, because someone prefers a higher pitch. Silence. Then. I understand. Let's meet. Would you come by the office after tea? I'd like to talk with you face to face. When I arrived, he looked older under the fluorescent light, lines deeper at the corners of his eyes. His watch on his wrist looked like the one my father used to wear. He had his glasses perched on his head as always, and when he reached for them his fingers trembled a fraction. He kept touching the Bible as if to steady himself. I asked for the change because I thought it would uplift the music, he said. Came out quick, a small confession. People I thought would support us were pushing for a modern aesthetic. Jason, he's persuasive. Persuasive enough to ask me to step away? I asked. My fingers found the little bird brooch at my lapel, and I didn't realize I was fingering it until the metal warmed under my thumb. His gaze dropped. He suggested a different texture, yes. I thought. Perhaps we try a new formation just for the dedication. It got out of hand. You thought, I repeated. The phrase tasted like grief. You let it get out of hand where I stood. He flinched as if struck. Eleanor, There was so much unsaid in that room. His palms were soft, his fingers edged with calluses from paper and pulpit. He wanted to protect the church from scandal. He wanted to honor the donors who liked Jason's vision. He wanted to keep the peace. In the end, those wants wrapped around one another until they formed a noose of compromise. I left a note, I told him. It was not an accusation. Just a reminder. He reached out and took the envelope from my hand. He read the line twice, lips moving. Music belongs to all. He looked up at me then, eyes wet. You're right. We spoke then as people who have shared more years than disagreements about compromise, about how change can feel like erasure. He said things like, I'm trying to shepherd. And I heard in them both care and fatigue. I listened to the small breaks in his sentences, the way he inhaled when he could not find the right words. He did not offer to undo everything in a single gesture. He offered instead to listen, and to speak with the trustees. After our meeting, an email went out to the congregation. It was tidy and pastoral. Changes in musical leadership, an opportunity to regroup. Names were careful. No one named blame. The rumor mill did what it always does. Small clusters of whispers in the fellowship hall, sympathetic glances, a few sharp ones. But the knot of it loosened in a way I hadn't expected. Within a week, Jason was not standing behind the choir. His baton, sleek and silver, sat in his absence, a quiet accusation on the music stand. No one announced his leaving with the banner. It was small, administrative. Real life rarely wraps things in theatrical notes. That Sunday I went up to the loft. Melissa was there, smiling, but her smile had that tightness young people wear when they inherit a thorn. She smoothed the hem of her dress and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Her thumb found the bite mark she'd always had, and she worried at the nail. When our eyes met, she gave me a look that was not triumph but discomfort. She mouthed, I'm sorry. I didn't ask for your place. she said quietly when we passed in the aisle later. Her voice was a whisper of cotton. If it makes it easier. I'm sorry. I saw the way her fingers fiddled with the cross pendant at her throat. She was not the architect of this. She was young and earnest and being pulled into someone else's friction. It's not your doing, I told her. My own voice trembled. For a moment I almost let the age show. I reached and brushed her hand with a gesture that was both passing of the torch and something gentler, a benediction. Sing well. Keep the music true. The service began. The organ breathed like an animal waking. Standing there with the pipes glinting behind me, I felt an odd mingling of vindication and sorrow. My line came in, steady not flawless, and I sang it as if stitching a seam back together. My throat tightened on a high note. My hands trembled on the pew. But the phrase held. Around me faces turned, some surprised, some suddenly aware. Pastor Willis watched from the chancel, his hand on the Bible. He did not look away. After people came by with small words. I'm glad you're here, we missed you, I didn't know. The praise was not the same as justice. It was quieter, like someone giving you their chair at a hot parade. Still, it meant something. There were conversations to be had after that. Board meetings, reconciliations, apologies that stayed in rooms and didn't make it into the hymn book. Jason's absence was not the end of the story. It was a change in the chorus. But for the first time since the wave of his hand dismissed me from the loft, I felt the sound around me include my thread again. Standing at the rail, the iron cool beneath my palm, I let the pipes keep singing. The brass vibrated through my shoes, through the bird on my lapel, into the little hollow where Richard's coat used to hang. Maybe I had not fixed everything. Maybe the church would continue to shift in ways that left people behind. But for that moment the music held me. And that was enough to make the next Sunday worth preparing for. After that Sunday the way people looked at me changed, small things at first like a seam coming undone. It started in the fellowship hall, where the coffee still steamed and the lemon-scented polish made the air smell like Sundays. I carried a paper plate because that's what you do after service, smile, say hello, ask about grandkids. The room was full of faces I had known longer than some of their children had been alive. Yet as I crossed toward the table, conversations loosened at the edges. Laughter would ease up, then stop mid-phrase. Eyes slid away like a choir part that changed key and left them unsure where to land. Eleanor, a woman I'd taught Sunday school with for years, gave me a small nod, the kind that keeps a distance. Her name is Ruth. She and I once baked communion bread together. Her hand paused over a tray of brownies as if she couldn't decide whether to offer one or turn her back. She chose the turn. Whispers followed me through the room like a secondary hymn. Not the loud, angry kind. More like breathy ornaments, quick and then gone. People leaned in at the snack table and then looked up, pretending to search for a napkin. A man I'd sung beside for 3 decades, Harold, moved his chair a fraction of an inch away when I sat. It was almost polite. It hurt all the more for it. Doors started to close a fraction earlier after I approached. The side door to the nursery, which used to open wide when I walked by, now latched shut as if a hand had flicked an unseen switch. The hallway to the parlor, where we used to hang announcements, had a newcomer's table crowded in front of it. Once someone would have stepped aside for me, called my name so the room would know I belonged. Now the room rearranged itself without me in mind. People I had babied through funerals, visited when they were ill, brought casseroles to after surgeries. They would stop 3 pews away and say, "We should catch up soon," and then exchange a glance that turned soon into maybe never. Invitations dwindled to the kind that arrived by broad bulletin or email, not personal phone calls. I used to get a call on Thursday asking whether I could bring something to the potluck. Now the potluck sign-up sheet had an extra list of unfamiliar names. Even the children seemed to sense it. Little Ruthie Patterson, who once tugged my sleeve to show me a sticker, glanced at me and ducked behind her mother. The choir kids, young faces I had watched grow, skipped the usual hello. Melissa met my eye only once in the weeks after and then looked away, fingers worrying the bite on her thumb. Her apology, quiet and, sometimes, on days when the hurt felt too sharp, I would walk to the little park bench across from the church and sit in the sun. The town felt simpler there. Kids with baseball gloves, a dog that insisted on sharing a stick. People would nod hello in honest, neighborly ways. It reminded me that the world outside the sanctuary still held me. But the sanctuary, the place with the hymn books and polished wood, was a different economy now. In that place my gift had become something people needed to interpret. Pastor Willis tried to steady things, his voice softer than before. He called meetings with the trustees and listened like someone sorting a pile of photographs, careful not to crease the edges. He would come find me after service and say, "I'm working on it," and his eyes would look older in that small light. His apologies were real, but there was a weariness under them, like paper that's been folded too many times. He could not make everyone meet me halfway. There were kinder moments too, not many but sharp enough to remind me why I stayed. An older woman named Helen reached out one Wednesday and held my hand across a tea saucer. "We were foolish," she whispered, voice thin with years. "You're the heart of this place. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Her fingers smelled of lavender and the faint antiseptic of the care home where she'd moved. That single grip felt like a small bridge in a widening river. But the pattern tightened. I began arriving earlier on Sundays, choosing seats in the back where people might forget I was there. I stood in the choir robe before rehearsal, and pulled the robe around me in a way that felt protective. My hands found the bird brooch more often, fingers tracing its curve until the metal warmed under my skin. It was a ritual that steadied me, a private thank you to a life I had loved. At home, the telephone no longer chimed with friendly invitations. It offered the quiet that falls after a crowd leaves a room. Nights grew long with rehearsed prayers. I wrote notes, short sentences, that I left unopened in a drawer. Music belongs to all. I'd write again and again, as if the sentence could become a spell. The echo of that Sunday, of the organ's first chord without me, kept settling in. Each week the whispers went on, soft at first and then with the sopranos and altos of a choir finding a new balance. I kept showing up. I kept singing when they let me. But the space between me and some of the people I had loved felt larger. And with every small closing of a door, with every averted glance, that space grew quieter and colder. The room hums before anyone speaks. The organ's loa still hanging from last Sunday's playing. The varnish on the pulpit giving off that citrus-sweet lemon scent I know like a familiar hymn. I can feel the vibration of sound in my teeth, like a distant train passing under the town. Pastor Willis stands at the lectern. The wood is warm under his palm. The sanctuary is full, fuller than usual. You can taste the tension in the air, metallic like pennies in your mouth. I clasp my hands so hard my knuckles blanch. Fingers braided together as if I could stitch myself to the moment and not fall through. My breath is small, careful. An exercise in inward prayer. Breathe in. Breathe out. Keep the voice inside me steady. The choir sits to my left. Melissa too rose up. Faces turned forward, some polite, some like people waiting for a verdict. Pastor Willis opens his Bible and for a second his voice is the strong one I know. Resonant. A pulpit voice that has held baptisms and funerals and meals after hospital rooms. Then he says my name. Not aloud but in the way he shifts his eyes to the trustees on the right side. His next sentence hangs there, deliberately neutral. We're called to be a community that listens. The words roll through the rafters. The organ picks up the undertone. A sympathetic vibration that seems to underline every syllable. A candle on the communion table sputters. I smell the wick burn. I watch the flame lean as if someone had whispered to it. For a breath it steadies, then with that sudden ordinary cruelty of small things it goes out. No wind, no dramatic gust. Just a soft, sorry sigh of smoke that tastes like a hush. A woman 2 pews down gasps. The sound is so small it could be a mouse. and yet the whole room hunches into the silence the candle leaves behind. Pastor Willis keeps speaking. His voice is trying to hold things together. Change is hard, he says. And sometimes we hurt in the places we never thought we would. His throat tightens at the end of the sentence. The sound of his voice vibrates through the lectern, into the wood floor, and then into my shoes. The smell of lemon polish and old paper closes around us like a shawl. Then the side door of the choir loft creaks, an old hinge protesting, and a man stands. Not any man. Mr. Hardy, head of the trustees, the one with the neat cufflinks and the bland, practiced smile that hides nerves. He leans forward so suddenly the pews creak and says, "The congregation needs clarity. We have donors with expectations. We must move forward." His words are measured, but there is a sharpness beneath them, like a file on wood. The room splits into murmurs, low and urgent. I can feel the murmurs sliding across my shoulders like a draft. My hands squeeze together until my thumb goes numb. I want to stand. I want to say, "This was my gift. This place is my home." I want to ask, "Since when does generosity come with a program note?" But the sound in my throat is fragile, like spun glass. I keep my mouth closed. I keep my breathing even. As if the sanctuary itself refuses a neat resolution, something else happens. Above the chancel, a small brass crucifix, mounted for decades and politely ignored, comes loose. It swings for a breath and then falls with a dull clack onto the hymnals below. Heads turn. A hush magnifies into a held inhale. The crucifix does not break. It simply lies there, overturned, an impossible small violence in the quiet. Someone utters, "Oh," like a prayer or a dismissal. I cannot tell which. My heart beats loud enough that for a moment I think everyone must hear it. My palms are slick against one another. I press the heel of my hand into the crevice between my fingers to stop the tremor. The bird brooch at my lapel feels heavy, pressing its coldness into my sternum. For 42 years I've learned to carry myself without spectacle. Now everything feels exposed, as if someone has drawn back a curtain that was never meant to be moved. Pastor Willis closes the Bible with a sound that echoes. He looks older in that moment, his shoulders curved as if trying to shelter a smaller heat. His voice fractures, soft but honest. "We are feeling the strain of choices," he says. "We must remember grace." The word hangs there, fragile as the extinguished candle. His gaze meets mine for the tiniest of seconds. He opens his mouth as if to speak more. And then he does not. That pause is a small painful thing, longer than any one sentence should be. From the back, a woman stands up, her chair scraping like a complaint. "Are you asking us to choose donors over people?" Her voice is raw and quick. She is followed by another, then another. The room becomes a collage of small arguments, polite and brutal. People who have backed me in casseroles and visits speak with a distance they do not understand they have acquired. Mr. Hardy folds his hands as if he can fold the trouble away. The trustees trade looks. I clasp my hands tighter. I count my breaths like beads. I feel the air go into me like a held note. My hands are the only thing I can manage to steady. I imagine Richard's face in the second pew where he used to sit, now only a memory and the echo of his shoes against the wood. Would he have stood for me? He always did. I picture him clearing his throat in that familiar, indignant way he had when someone tried to be unjust. The picture steadies me. It does not change what is happening, but it makes the tremor in my throat small enough to be named. A child begins to cry in the foyer. A thin, bright sound that slices through the debate like a bell. Someone shushes the child. The shushing is like a bandage pressed across a cut. It doesn't fix the wound, only holds it in. Melissa's hand brushes mine as she passes in the aisle, fingers warm and hesitant. She doesn't sit. She does not take my place. She simply passes, looks at me with an apology that dissolves quickly into the next sentence she does not speak. The room fills with voices, some pleading, some practical. Pastor Willis raises his hand and for a moment the sound drops. He asks for patience. He asks for prayer. Pastor Willis did what pastors do when they are trying to apologize and keep things whole. He arranged a meeting. He called me first with that voice that always held a little gravity. He said, "We need to talk, Eleanor. I want the trustees present." I heard the rack of papers in the background. I heard him try to sort a sentence into an apology. I went because I wanted answers, and because I wanted to see whether goodness could be patient enough to fix what had been bruised. The conference room smelled of coffee and paper. The trustees sat around the table with their practiced faces, Mr. Hardy with his cufflinks, Harold the old tenor with his folded hands, two others I knew in passing. Pastor Willis put my envelope on the table. He slid it across as if pushing a small inconvenient truth toward everyone. "I asked her to leave this," he said. "She left it after the service." He cleared his throat and sat down. Mr. Hardy read the agreement first. His finger followed the typed lines, then found my handwritten note. He read "Music belongs to all" out loud, as if testing how the sentence would hold in the air. The words landed and made a small sound. "No stipulations," Pastor Willis said. "No conditions." She asked it remain anonymous. She gave it because she loved this place. One of the younger trustees, someone who had been in charge of outreach, shifted, then passed a phone across the table. "There were emails," he said. "From Jason." He swiped and projected them onto the wall. Lines from rehearsals, suggestions about repertoire, a phrase about appealing to key supporters, with a more marketable sound. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was a pattern. Nudges meant to steer, not to serve. Harold's voice when he spoke was quiet and willowy with age. "We thought we were answering donors," he said. "We thought we needed to bring in younger folks to keep people giving. We misread where the boundaries were." He looked at me and the apology was small and real. "We didn't ask Eleanor. We didn't listen." It is a strange thing to watch a room of people untangle themselves. The trustees had not meant malice. No one walked in with a map to hurt me. They were balancing budgets and hopes, projecting need onto faces. Still, that awareness didn't make the hurt evaporate. But it made room for something else, accountability. They voted, quietly and without the brass flourish of a courtroom drama, to pause the musical reorganization until the congregation could be consulted. They asked Jason to step back while a committee formed to assess direction and leadership. It was an administrative solution, a slow hinge that would not erase the indignity I had felt. But it was a beginning. When Pastor Willis reached for my hand in the hallway after the meeting, his fingers were warm and trembling. "We failed you," he said, and the words were not a sermon. They were his confession. He told me how he'd feared losing patrons, how he'd let the trustees' anxieties drown out a wife's decades in a choir. He told me, too, that he wished he had done it differently, had listened sooner. That Sunday I went up to the loft for the first service after the meeting. The organ breathed beneath the pipes like a living thing. Sun came through the stained glass and dust motes turned in slow orbits. Melissa was there. A careful smile that made her eyes look older for a second. She offered me the place by her shoulder without theatrics. A small, solid benediction. When my part arrived, my voice trembled, because my hand still held the memory of being waved away, but it steadied on the line as if remembering its trade. The sound wasn't flawless. There were little catches in the high notes. My throat constricted like an old string pulled taut. But the choir folded around me, and for the first time in weeks I felt the exact place I had always had. A voice in a larger weave. After the service, people came to the back pew like tributaries returning to the river. Not everyone. Change is slow and some wounds take seasons, but enough. Harold hugged me with that tenor's embrace, his cheek warm against mine. Pastor Willis found me and did not offer polished answers. He offered presence. Melissa lingered with a paper cup of coffee and said, "I didn't know. I'm sorry." Her words were small. They were also honest. It would be simple to say the congregation was healed in a Sunday. It wasn't. There were trustees who needed convincing. There were conversations that would happen in rooms I would not see. There was also the awkwardness of people adjusting to the fact my gift had meant more than a name in the ledger. But what changed, in a way that mattered, was that the church had to reckon with what it meant to belong here. Walking home that morning, the bird brooch at my lapel caught sunlight and winked. The organ's last chord reverberated in my shoes. I thought of Richard and how he used to straighten my bun and say, "Sing steady." I did not feel triumphant. I felt steadier. I felt visible again in a place I had helped make. Grace, I learned, isn't always a curtain call. Sometimes it is the slow, unglamorous work of people admitting error and choosing to repair. Music belongs to all. It's a sentence I had written with a trembling hand. It turned out to be true not because the pipe stopped shining, but because people finally heard the note that had been there all along. I walk into the sanctuary on a slow Tuesday, when the sun slants in like a question. The pew where Richard used to sit is empty, as it always is, but today the wood looks less like absence and more like memory, polished grooves catching the light. I rest my palm on the back of the pew, feel the familiar smoothness, the faint lemon scent that never really leaves the place. It steadies me the way that first sip of coffee does in the morning, a little ritual that says the day will hold. The loft is quiet. The pipes stand like a small city of brass, their faces reflecting a spill of colored light. I climb the narrow stairs slowly, fingers brushing the iron rail until the pattern is plain beneath my touch. The bird brooch at my lapel flashes once, then again, as if winking in a language only I remember. Up here the air smells of pipe oil and old paper, and underneath it all, the faint sweetness of hymn book glue. It's the church's own perfume. I sit on the edge of the choir bench, legs crossed at the ankles, and listen. There is no rehearsal tonight. No metronome of a baton tapping off beats. The organ is silent, but it hums in the bones, an aftersound of all the Sundays that made it into this instrument. I close my eyes and can almost hear the hollow of pipes breathing in the attic of the world. I imagine the air inside them, pressed, released, carries the prayers we never said out loud. People have asked whether I felt triumphant when things changed, when Jason left and the trustees called for a pause. The honest thing is that the feeling wasn't a brass fanfare. It was quieter. It was the careful thrum after a wound begins to scab. It was the sound of small hands folding up a letter and setting it down on a desk where somebody finally read it. The congregation has shifted its weight back toward itself. Not everyone returns. Some ripples in a pond never quite settle. But there are afternoons now when someone will cross the nave to say something real. Helen with her lavender cards will press a note into my palm. Harold will squeeze my shoulder hard enough that I feel his long tenor years in my bones. Melissa, she lingers in the doorway sometimes, won't meet my eyes at first, and then she does, and there's a kind of apology that doesn't need a dozen words. I watch the dust motes in the slanting light and think about all the little things that changed. Rehearsal times adjusted so older voices can make it. The sign up for coffee hour put out on a table with my name still penciled in. A new committee that meets to make sure decisions aren't made behind closed doors. They are small repairs, the sort that takes patience rather than grand gestures. They remind me that belonging is not a single verdict. It's a series of small, steady acts. There are afternoons I come up just to sit. I thread my fingers through the iron rail and feel the grooves that other hands left long before mine. Sometimes I run my thumb over the spot on my palm where Richard would have rested his hand. Sometimes I lay the brooch where I used to place it on the hymnal and listen to the echo. Once, in the middle of a summer heat, a child ran up the stairs, breath wild, and asked me a question about a hymn book illustration. Her voice was bright and unafraid. I answered, and she smiled like a belle. After she left, the loft felt a little fuller. There are still Sundays that pricked me, An offhand comment, a chair pulled an extra inch. But they are fewer. The sting is more memory than present, like the shadow of a bruise that taught you how to guard the spot. The organ still speaks. I think about Richard a lot. I think about how he would have wanted this, not the scandal or the bruised pride but the mending. He would have said, "Eleanor, sing steady." And I would have told him the truth about how sometimes steadiness looks a lot like showing up and being patient. I talk to him in the empty pew sometimes, and the sound of my own voice feels like a litany in which both of us are named. One afternoon after a rehearsal, Melissa stayed behind. She smoothed the folds of her dress and handed me a small folded program. "We put your name on the roster today," she said, and there was something shy and fierce in the way she said it. I nodded. I told her, "Keep singing. Keep asking questions." She smiled, fingers worrying the little cross at her throat, and walked away like someone practicing courage. There are endings here that were quiet, the rustle of a resignation letter, the soft closing of a door. There are beginnings, too, that are quieter still. A trustee who once thought only of donors now asks about the choir's Friday night potlucks. A teenager who used to sneak in late sits up straight and asks for rehearsal tips. It is all slow, the way a tide shifts because of a pebble under the sand. When I leave the church now, I close the heavy wooden door behind me deliberately. The wind catches it, and for a breath the door swings shut with a decisive, ordinary thud. My footsteps cross the gravel walk. They are steady, not hurried. The birds in the hedgerow argue politely and then fall quiet. The last light on the brass pipes flashes like a wink through the stained glass. I feel something settle as I walk away. Not the kind of finality that snaps a book closed, but the kind that tucks a ribbon into a page. Whatever this chapter was, sharp, bruising, tender, its edges have softened. A bench waits in the nave. Someone will sit there next Sunday, and maybe the next one after. The hymn will find its shape again, with a place in it for voices that tremble and voices that soar. I lift my chin, pinch the bird brooch between my fingers one last time, and let the wind press the church door closed behind me. The weeks after the meeting unraveled slowly, like a spool of thread being rewound, one careful inch at a time. I found myself waking on Sundays with a prick of the old anxiety, and then a steadier breath took over as I smoothed my skirt and pinned the little silver bird where it belonged. The smell of coffee and lemon polish was the same, comforting, ordinary, but the way people looked at me changed in small, telling ways. Some eyes softened. Some glanced away, unsure of how to re-enter a story that had been rearranged. Some simply smiled and meant it. Pastor Willis carried a new sort of humility. He still had his Bible on the desk, worn where his thumb lingered, but he walked through the fellowship hall like a man who had recently learned how fragile the places we trust can be. He began to ask different questions at the board meetings. Who was heard in the choice? Who would be left out? And he listened in a way that pulled more breath back into the room. There were no grand confessions splashed across the bulletin. The repairs were quieter. Meetings. Apologies that landed like soft cloth on a bruise. A few trustees stepped back. Others adjusted. The church, for all its painted windows and polished brass, is mostly held together by small, steady acts. Those began to appear. Melissa kept her place in the choir without fanfare. She sang with a careful courage that made her voice bloom in new ways. Once, after rehearsal, she waited by the stairs, cheeks flushed from practicing the high line. She handed me a folded program and said, almost in apology, "We put your name back on the roster." Her fingers worried the cross at her throat. I told her to keep asking questions and to sing honestly. She nodded, then smiled in that hesitant, bright way young people have. Like someone who has learned to carry another's story, and is still deciding how to honor it. There were Sundays when I still felt the old pinch, an absent hello at the coffee table, a chair moved a fraction too far, but those moments were shorter, less defining. More often now there were long, ordinary minutes of fellowship. Harold asking about a song phrase, Helen pressing a lavender sachet into my hand, a child tugging my sleeve to point out an angel in the stained glass. Little gestures, all of them stitches. They didn't erase what had happened, but they made the place habitable again. I surprised myself by going up to the loft on a random Tuesday afternoon, when the church smelled of dust and pipe oil and the late sun slanted like a question through the panes. I sat with my hands on the iron rail and felt the grooves worn by generations. Music's fingerprints. The organ was quiet, but I could feel the aftersound in my bones, a pleasant old ache. I rested my palm over the bird brooch until the metal warmed. I remembered why I had given the money in the first place. Not for recognition, but so the sound would outlast us and carry our prayers forward. The donation still sits on a ledger somewhere, an entry in a ledger that now has a different margin note. Consult the congregation. It's an administrative thing, awkward and real. I don't hold that against anyone. People are complicated. So am I. I learned through the awkwardness and the small reconciliations that generosity can be misread, that stewardship can be weaponized, but also that communities can undo what's been done when they are willing to look at themselves. There were nights I talked to Richard in the empty pew, quiet conversations that felt less like bargaining and more like mapping. He would, I am certain, have been cross with whoever thought they could wave me away. He would have straightened my bun and said, "Sing steady." I did my best to listen to him and to the deeper voice that had guided me through 42 years in him and neighborly work, the voice that kept saying, even when hands shook, that showing up mattered. What surprised me was how little theatrics it required to reclaim a place. No dramatic confrontation. No banners. Just people doing the slow, awkward business of listening. Pastor Willis tightened policies, the trustees agreed to more transparency, and the choir, our living fabric, adjusted its weave to hold more voices. It was not a perfect mending. There were still edges to smooth and conversations to have. But the small repairs felt honest. The organ still sounds like dawn breaking over the town. Sometimes I stand beneath the pipes and let the notes travel through my shoes, up into the hollow where memory lives. The sound is not about one person's pride. It is about a room learning how to fit all its voices. I think, often, about the note I left in the envelope on Pastor Willis's desk. I wrote it with trembling hands and a hope I could not yet say aloud. Standing at the rail now, feeling the cool iron under my fingers and the warm wood under my palm, I know that belonging is not a single moment but a practice. It takes patience. It takes stubborn faith. It takes showing up, again and again, even when the welcome is uncertain. Music belongs to all. If you've made it this far, thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying until the end. If you feel it in your heart, please subscribe so you won't miss the next stories, and keep walking with me by watching the other videos I've prepared with care. And please, share in the comments what you thought of my testimony. I will read every word.